Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of the Cooperation Tulsa Organizer Education Group. We are continuing our reading of Eric McBay's Full Spectrum Resistance Volume 1. After we finish Volume 1, we'll be moving on to Volume 2, but that'll probably be a little while before we get done with Volume 1. So, yeah, by the way, anybody who's watching this now, you can go back to the previous sessions of the organizer education program. All of the live live sessions that we've done are up on both the Anark YouTube channel and on the Cooperation Tulsa YouTube channel. I believe this is our 12th session, so there are 11 sessions you can listen to before this one if you just want to get caught up with us. However, now what we need to do is we need to get everybody here in chat to count off. So there's counting off 1. So who wants to read second and third and so on? Oh, we already got it. We got 1, 2, 4. 5. Nice. Okay, we'll just skip 3, right? Yeah. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm linking the link around. Okay, there we go. So, yeah, I am about to. Yeah, you don't have to read out loud if you don't want to. You can sit here and listen. At the end of this, we will have a short discussion time where we'll just go over what we read out loud during the session. So let's see here. I'll just get us started. It looks like we had maybe just finished. No, yeah, we were done with decentralized, centralized, right? Where did we end? Let me check. It should be in one of these. The costs of excessive centralization. That's what the section was we were on. So here we go. Got it brought up now. So this is a gray box. So this is just kind of an interruption to the total text, but I'll start us off here. The costs of excessive centralization. Let me give you an example from the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. In a story that Tom Mangold and John Pennicate tell in the tunnels of Cu Chi, a 17-year-old female guerrilla fighter named Vo Timo is ordered to assault a command post belonging to ARVN, the South Vietnamese military allied with the United States. To carry out the attack, she and her unit cut and blast their way through 11 different layers of perimeter fence. To keep her in contact with the guerrilla commanders, Vo Timo is assigned a 10-year-old messenger boy. As they approach the command post, Wright Mangold and Pennicate, quote, the perimeter guard tower put up little resistance, and Vo Timo sent her messenger boy to return through the wire to ask permission from the command outside to take the main post. Because guerrillas were subject to strong and disciplined central control, even in the very heat of battle, the messenger had to run through fire again and again to take action reports to the command, and new orders from the command back to the front, end quote. She was ordered to take prisoners. However, because of the back and forth delay in receiving orders, the guerrillas were caught in a prolonged and somewhat bloody fight with the ARVN soldiers. Vo Timo took 2 prisoners, but by the time she received the order to retreat, one of her prisoners had been severely injured by a grenade from his own side, and the other had been shot trying to escape. Vo Timo and her young messenger barely escaped alive. Excessive centralization can have real costs. So that's the end of the gray box, and we're now returning to the main body of the text. An organization which many of us thought indestructible and indivisible fell apart right before our eyes. Oh, this is a quote. So I'm going to give the context for this. This is talking about the Sandinistas. Tellez, who's somebody who was one of the Sandinistas, was talking about the Sandinistas, and they said, an organization which many of us thought indestructible and indivisible fell apart right before our eyes. Why did we divide into tendencies? A lack of maturity, perhaps. Our organization just wasn't prepared for a self-critical process. Few leaders and even fewer members had ever had the opportunity to talk about or pay much attention to theory. And there must always be a theoretical process. So, step by step, it was really hard. The few books we did have access to were not enough. Now, as far as the tendencies are concerned, we did have one advantage. The three tendencies were all more or less Sandinistas. That was our common heritage, and it did unite us. End quote. These examples identify some of the key methods for avoiding factionalism in resistance movements. And these are 5 bullet points. Bullet point 1, shared cultural identity and shared theory development. 2, inclusive decision-making and discussion. 3, sharing resources to avoid conflict. 4, internal conflict resolution. And 5, some degree of central coordination where appropriate. Despite the advantages of central planning and prolonged conflict, some kinds of organizations necessarily remain decentralized. Groups that exist mostly for propaganda, consciousness raising, or training will often be more effective when decentralized. As always, resistance groups must strike a balance between conflicting organizational needs, but that balance may be different at different levels of operation. Next.
According to the U.S. Army Field Manual on Guerrilla Warfare, asymmetric conflict is characterized by centralized planning and decentralized execution. Central strategic planning is useful, but tactical execution is decentralized out of necessity. Separate resistance units may have limited communication with each other. They may be geographically scattered. They may consist of clandestine cells. But they need to be flexible to be able to respond to their specific circumstances within the larger strategy. Quote, this type of agility can only be achieved in a decentralized milieu, end quote, explains former Special Forces officer Stan Goff. A lack of strategic coordination can make a group ineffective, but excessive centralization at the tactical level can be just as bad. See sidebar. It is like a little icon. I think it's a scarf that says informal, and then a tie that says formal. Section 3, I think. Does a group have clear and defined roles for people, or is it an undefined mass in which people take on different jobs or tasks in an ad hoc fashion? Formal organizing is the second part of what Gamson calls combat readiness. For Gamson, an organization is formal if it meets 3 conditions. 1, it must have a written document outlining the organization's purpose and operation. This could be something as complicated as a binder full of charters and bylaws, and as simple as a page-long statement of a group's points of unity. 2, it must have a formal list of members. And 3, it must have at least 3 layers of organization. In a labor union, this could be made up of an executive committee, the shop stewards, and the rank and file. It doesn't even have to be hierarchical. It could be made up of a steering committee, active members, and supporters. Gamson found that formal organization makes a dramatic difference in success rates, especially when combined with centralization. Groups that were formal and centralized were most effective, with a success rate of 75%. Groups with a mixed organizational approach had a success rate close to average. Informal, centralized groups succeeded 56% of the time, while formal, decentralized groups succeeded 50% of the time. Groups that were both informal and decentralized had the abysmally low success rate of 15%. Centralized and formal organization can give resistance movements a big boost, and Gamson explains the benefits in terms of combat readiness. Quote, by creating a structure of roles with defined expectations in the place of diffuse commitments, a challenging group can better assure that certain necessary tasks will be routinely performed. It gives the challenging group a higher readiness for action. End quote. Those who study resistance movements often distinguish between five different roles, which are sometimes overlapping. Leaders are those who inspire and organize the movement and who often make or facilitate decisions. Cadres are the backbone of the resistance movement, full time activists or professional revolutionaries who take on the daily organizing work, participate in decision making, mobilize people, and generally do whatever needs doing. Combatants or frontline activists are those most directly engaged in conflict with power and who often take on considerable risk. Auxiliaries are supporters who help when needed, usually on a part time basis. And the mass base is that group of supporters and sympathizers in the broader community who advocate who advocate for the movement but lack formal roles. Next.
These archetypal roles often have analogies in any given formal group. Take the deacons of defense. Lance Hill writes that there were four tiers of membership in the Jonesboro Deacons. The first tier, the activist corps, comprised approximately 20 members who paid dues and regularly attended meetings and participated in patrols. The second tier, active members, consisted of about 100 men who occasionally paid dues and attended meetings, but usually took part in activities only when necessary. The third tier, the reinforcements, comprised roughly 100 to 200 men who did not pay dues or attend meetings, but agreed with the deacon strategy and could be depended on to volunteer if needed. The fourth and most amorphous tier contained the self-proclaimed deacons, those individuals who, without official sanction, declared themselves to be deacons. Though lacking formal ties to the organization, this fourth tier helped popularize the deacons and self-defense strategy. We got a diagram basically demonstrating what we just went over. The center circle, the darkest one, talks about the activist corps, in which there are the leaders and the cadres. The active members are the frontline activists and combatants. That's a bit lighter gray. And the lightest gray is the reinforcements, the auxiliaries. And the last layer, it's white, were the self-proclaimed deacons, or the mass base of supporters and sympathizers. You can see the parallels. The activist corps consists of leaders and cadres. The active members were primarily combatants or frontline activists. The reinforcements were analogous to the auxiliaries, and the self-proclaimed deacons were part of the mass base of supporters and sympathizers. The mass base is often critical in building broader awareness, and the self-proclaimed deacons surely made the organization larger and more popular than it otherwise would have been. That said, the deacons were dependent on those who did pay, I assume it's dues. Are you able to scroll down? Yeah, dues to support the organization. There was a $10 fee to become a member, and members paid monthly dues of $2. In 2019 dollars, this would have been about $80 and $16 respectively. The dues system allowed the Deacons of Defense to become the only regional civil rights organization run by working class people. Their politics were not conducive to outside funding. As Lance Hill explains, the Deacons developed an autonomous, locally controlled organization that could survive without external leadership and funding from white liberals and national pacifist organizations. The Deacon staff, funding, and political legitimacy flowed from the local community. The Deacons held weekly meetings and major decisions were made democratically. Only dues-paying members in good standing were allowed to vote. In practical terms, the deacons were centralized on a local scale, but decentralized regionally, the opposite of most guerrilla organizations. Their organization was formal, but not needlessly exclusionary. The deacons found an optimal balance between different organizational tensions for the kind of work they did. Next.
Who is next? That
I
would be
believe it's back to
Peter.
you.
If you want to read Peter, you said you were nervous. You don't have to. You just want to skip over?
Yeah, if you don't mind, thank you.
All right, then. So let's see here. Oh, does anybody else want to get on stack to read? We got Kid Nutty and Eric here. Do one of you two want to jump on stack and read? They're like, not really, bro.
I'm sorry, I'm stuck at work, so I cannot really read right at the
I got
moment.
you.
I'm trying to listen.
Okay. I will continue here. Let me just make sure I have this all set up correct. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. Gamson found that groups that offered... yeah, that's where you were at? No. Here's another question of formality. Are groups more effective when they are held together by informal social relationships, or when members who do participate gain benefits or selective incentives, as unions offer to their members? Gamson found that groups that offered, quote, selective incentives to members were far more likely both to succeed and to gain antagonist acceptance than those that were held together mostly by solidarity alone. Those groups tended to be bigger, and many of them were unions. While the industrial workers of the world had some of the characteristics of a combat-ready organization, they struggled to find balance between their militancy and the need for selective incentives and more formal organizing. Wobbly organizer George Hoden tells the story of how a defrocked Scottish minister told him in a working camp, quote, "You're just wasting your life trying to make a working stiff understand anything. The only time he'll follow you is when his stomach is empty. The minute you fill his stomach, you can't talk nothing to him," end quote. Hoden concluded, quote, "I found that to be true. Once the crisis was over, the organization began to disintegrate. There was nothing to hold them together," end quote. The Wobblies used voluntary personal dues and were opposed to automatic paycheck deductions, for example, union dues or health insurance. They felt that paying organizers would encourage bureaucracy and reduce the accountability of leaders. They called it pork chopping. Quote, "The IWWs believed that the coming social revolution would provide ultimate solutions to such needs. In the interim, there could be special collections to meet emergencies," end quote. They also opposed written contracts. All these policies made it very difficult to set up any local infrastructure for the union or to secure their victories. This was apparent in the wake of the successful 1912 textile strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts, according to the editors of Solidarity Forever. Quote, "For a brief season, the IWW was on the threshold of unionizing textiles and redrawing the labor map of America. But the IWW victory never materialized. Among the IWW's problems was that the organization had not yet mastered the techniques of maintaining large locals on a permanent basis once the pressure of a strike was over," end quote. David J. Sapos, Sapos, that's what we're going with now, observed the same problems in his 1926 book, Left-Wing Unionism, a study of radical policies and tactics. For Sapos, one of the major shortcomings of the IWW was its, quote, failure to obtain stability, end quote. The IWW, he writes, quote, failed to establish local organizations that would function continuously in guarding the economic interests of the striking workers, end quote. He argues that some of the IWW leadership considered short-term material gains to be sop for the workers, and that the real goal was training militants for the ultimate revolution. Sapos specifically criticizes the IWW's policy against paid staff and the accumulation of strike funds. Quote, "When changed conditions became unbearable and brought about a new crisis needing concerted action, the organizing work had to be repeated. This emergency necessitated the improvising of a new strike organization, begging for funds, and so on. End quote. If social movements achieve progress like a ratchet, the Wobblies were perpetually stymied by their lack of a pawl, a stopper. They failed to institutionalize their victories. Next.
The Wobblies did have local union halls in a few places, but mostly lacked stable infrastructure. The IWW leadership was mobile. Mobile? Mobile. They rarely called strikes, but instead were asked to join other strikes, rallying the workers, leading militant action, and calling in reinforcements. But as Sapos notes, they rarely, quote, they rarely undertook to organize the unorganized, merely leading their spontaneous strikes and upon terminating of them, abandoning the workers to their own resources, end quote. The leaders who called them in often criticized the IWW for not taking action of the enthusiasm generated during strikes to organize the workers into permanent unions. Though he criticized the Wobblies for failing to establish enduring organizations, Sapos argues that they were very important as a propaganda organization. Quote, "The secret of success for a propaganda organization is a select group of individuals with initiative, intelligence, and militancy. Such organization must bring together a group of evangelists who can inspire and proselytize. In short, what the IWW terms a militant minority. Propaganda organizations are primarily interested in cultivating ideas and sentiments and, if at all successful, extend their influence far beyond the narrow bounds of membership. With them, membership is naturally highly selective. Those joining must subscribe to their tenets and understand their aims. And since a propaganda organization offers no immediate return, only the faithful persist as members." End quote. Exactly as Jane Mansbridge would describe when writing about the iron law of involution 60 years later. Sapos concludes, quote, that the IWW did not succeed in becoming a stable organization and did not function on trade union lines is no indictment of its propaganda effectiveness. Propaganda bodies harvest their crop only when they either become realistic or act as feeders to practical organizations, end quote. The IWW's eventual decline came not from internal weakness, however, but because of vicious repression which worsened with the onset of war. The IWW was opposed to World War I, which they correctly saw as a war of capitalism and imperialism, and many Wobblies refused the draft or actively organized against it. The US government, facing both the internal threat of militant labor and the external threat of the war abroad, cracked down violently on the IWW. In concert with business owners, local sheriffs, private security, and the KKK, the government attacked the IWW over a period of years. In 1916, businessmen and sheriff massacred about 10 union members in Everett, Washington. Wobbly anti-war activist Frank Little was lynched in Butte, Montana, in 1917. That same year, the KKK attacked 17 Wobblies in Tulsa, Oklahoma, burning them with hot tar, and then did the same to 5 witnesses. In 1919, IWW member Wesley Everest was lynched after a shootout in Centralia, Washington. Using new emergency legislation passed during the war, the government also arrested and tried hundreds of Wobblies in a series of indictments and raids that lasted years. That repression focused in particular on foreign-born members of the IWW, and those who were convicted, virtually all of them, were sentenced to prison terms as long as 20 years. This combination of legal measures and violence is commonly used against radical movements. See Chapter 9, Counterintelligence and Repression. The IWW never recovered the membership numbers it had at its apex, but many excellent wobbly organizers continued to work through the 20th century, and they've brought about something of a resurgence for the organization 100 years after its founding. Next.
So far, we've looked at movements that have struggled with the tensions of big versus small, centralized versus decentralized, informal versus informal. What I take away from these movements so far is the importance of finding the balance that will make an organization effective at accomplishing its particular goals. Some kinds of work may be hampered by formal organizing, as Piven and Cloward argued in Poor People's Movements. These situations are likely short-term campaigns that expect a quick victory and that rely on a group of supporters that is already militant and mobilized and who don't much care if informal hierarchies show up. On the other hand, groups that face a struggle that must carry out complex tasks that must be ready for combat and that seek to build enduring and democratic organizations are well advised to organize more formally if they want to win. But they must be careful not to put the success of their particular organization ahead of the ultimate goals of their movement. Groups can fall into this trap as part of the nonprofit industrial complex. See Chapter 10, Fundraising and Logistics. Section title, The Special Operations Executive. Formal organization can be used in many ways and be useful even in small groups. During the Second World War, the British Special Operations Executive was tasked with aiding anti-fascist resistance movements in occupied Europe and assist with their organization and coordination. The SOE was one of the earliest groups to professionalize resistance organizing. They learned much of their craft from the IRA and Michael Collins, in part because some SOE administrators had been on the English side of the war for Irish independence a generation earlier. These administrators used what they had learned as occupiers in Ireland to prepare resistors to fight against Nazi occupation. The SOE recruited agents among immigrants and refugees who had fled Nazi-occupied Europe and trained those agents in the skills of resistance at secret camps in the UK and Canada. SOE agents were then infiltrated back into Europe, either giving them false papers for border crossings or sneaking them in by parachute drop, submarine, or fishing boat. SOE organizers could then set up an underground resistance network or circuit. Upon arrival, the SOE agent would recruit a nucleus for the resistance circuit, a cell of cadres. The initial organizer would do this by carefully selecting staff officers who could be in charge of various sections. Provided their safety remains unimpaired, instructs the SOE training syllabus, the organization will be able to survive misfortunes. This nucleus was kept relatively small, usually about 5 to 17 people. The members of the nucleus would then set up additional sections, new departments or cells, which specialized in particular kinds of resistance. Operational sections included propaganda, passive resistance and minor sabotage, major sabotage, and paramilitary activities. The SOE distinguished minor sabotage, such as small workplace accidents and equipment malfunctions, as distinct from major sabotage, which requires a totally different kind of organization, consisting of small sabotage squads, highly trained and well-equipped. Support sections, on the other hand, were tasked with internal communication security. Communication security, reception. Are those periods?
No, they're
Anyway,
commas.
for meeting and receiving deliveries of supplies and personnel from abroad. Storage and distribution, transport, finance, recruiting, medical, especially in the case of paramilitary activities, and emergency measures consisting of hideouts, safe houses, and escape facilities. Next.
I think it's me next, right? So here we have like a diagram. It's a circle with 4 people connected by lines. So this is the total thing is labeled Special Operations Executive Circuit Nucleus. And each of the individual 4 people are labeled Circuit Organizer, Courier, Sabotage Instructor, and Wireless Operator. According to MRD Foote, quote, the ideal circuit organizer was his own wireless operator, but this was not often the case. The more usual grouping to run a circuit consisted of an organizer, usually but not always a task for a man, a courier, often but not always a woman, a wireless operator, who might be a man or a woman as a chance. Okay, I've totally read this wrong. I have to start this over. The more usual grouping to run a circuit consisted of an organizer, usually but not always a task for a man, a courier, often but not always a woman, a wireless operator, who might be a man or a woman as chance and friendship under training arranged, and a sabotage instructor, who was always a man. Recruitment for these sections was done on the basis of what needed doing. People were recruited for the job, not vice versa. Recruiting people just because they seemed like good candidates exposed the circuit to unnecessary people, created recruits with nothing to do, and gave an opportunity for the Nazis to offer up infiltrators who just seemed like good general candidates. A trick used against Jacques Lucéron in Chapter 7. All circuits were connected to SOE headquarters through limited wireless communication, or sometimes other slower methods for security or emergencies, which allowed resistance groups to coordinate with the broader Allied strategy. So now we have another diagram. This one's 4 circles. I'm going to have a pretty hard time probably explaining this one to people. The circles have different numbers of people in them. The one that we just saw a minute ago is noted as nucleus. Then there's another one called support section, which has 3 people. There's one called major, which has 4 people. And then there's one called propaganda section, which has 6 people. The kinds of clear roles used by SOE cells derive from military organizations, but related staff systems have been used by many resistance movements. See sidebar. So let me see how many pages I just said. Yeah, I'll just finish by reading off this gray box. Staff systems. Just as effective movements diversify among groups, effective organizations diversify internally. Organizations build capacity in part by encouraging people to specialize and develop their skills. Resistance movements have basic capacities needed for any campaign, which are echoed in the chapter structure of this book. In small groups, individuals may focus on these capacities. In larger organizations, entire committees or sections may be responsible. The approach used by the SOE had its roots in paramilitary structures, like the original IRA, and and in military staff systems used by many armies. The Continental Staff System from the French military had officers at the command level with responsibility for these domains. There are 9 listed here. 1. Personnel and administration. 2. Intelligence and security. 3. Operations. 4. Logistics. 5. Plans. 6. Communications/signal. 7. Training. 8. Resource management. 9. Civil affairs or civilian liaison. Different staff systems are adapted to their context. The staff system of the British military put a greater emphasis on logistics, a response to the hardship and losses because of poor organization during the Crimean War. Some systems, like the approach used by Michael Collins in the IRA, put a greater emphasis on intelligence, a subject I'll return to in Chapter 8. Next.
Subsection 4, consensus versus hierarchy. Are resistance movements more effective when they work by pure consensus, or when they have a clear hierarchy to get things done? Or when they have a clear hierarchy to get things done? what are the pros and cons of different approaches? Again, the options fall on a spectrum from the authority of a paramilitary army to the absolute participation of a well-facilitated consensus process. And again, the answers depend on what a group wants to get done. My friend and colleague, Wendy Luella Perkins, teaches facilitation and group dynamics, and she sums up a spectrum of general decision styles like so. First one, telling. Quote, here's the situation, and this is what we are going to do. Go do it. 2, selling. Here's the situation. This is what we are going to do and why I decided on this. Go do it. Testing. Here's the situation. Here's my solution. What do you think? Plan may get changed based on feedback. 4, consulting. Here's the situation. What do you think we should do? Listen to ideas and then take the best of the lot, either from one person or combining multiple suggestions. Last one, co-creating. Here's the situation. Let's come up with a solution together. Each part of the spectrum has its own advantages and disadvantages. The directive end of the spectrum is quick and efficient. Decisions can be made, carried out, and evaluated while the opposition is still trying to agree on what the problem is. The more participatory end of the spectrum can build strategic and organizational strength by incorporating many different perspectives and making many people involved and invested in the process and decisions. But it can also take a very long time, which makes it difficult for a group to respond to emergencies. Without a clear sense of direction, groups can lose their morale, drive, and sense of engagement. There are 4 basic types of decision-making used by resistance movements. First one, rank hierarchies. A permanent rank structure with a distinct chain of command. This is used by military and paramilitary organizations, including most guerrilla groups. Civilian organizations use something like it when they must deal quickly with life or death situations, as in hospital trauma centers or fire departments. On the battlefield, in trauma rooms, and at burning buildings, life and death situations must be made on timescales too short to permit discussion. Protracted decision-making could, in fact, be dangerous. Rank structures are good at dealing with complex and dangerous tasks for several reasons. People are specialized with specific roles. They know what they are responsible for doing, and they train and drill to do it well under stress. A hierarchy means that decisions can be made and implemented quickly. Clear organization and purpose helps to maintain group unity and discipline. And if someone is removed from the hierarchy, injured, imprisoned, killed, it is immediately clear whose job it is to step in and replace them to continue the fight. A hierarchy is often used in clandestine organizations where only a few decision makers have access to all of the necessary information. But hierarchies, as we all know, have some important shortcomings, especially when used in situations for which they are not suited. They can reinforce existing social hierarchies like patriarchy or white supremacy if people are promoted based on dominant social privileges or norms, like being loud and aggressive. Or they can exclude valuable information or perspectives, suppress legitimate internal dissent. Or they can put people in power without accountability or groups informed consent, and so on. Resistance groups that do use rank hierarchies often try to compensate for these shortcomings. They promote carefully and thoughtfully. They try to consult as much as possible, and they explain why they do what they do. And they may establish a democratic civilian body to direct military policy, as the PAIGC did, and as the Zapatistas have done to some degree. Next.
A potential weakness of centralized hierarchies is that they can make groups vulnerable to decapitation attacks. Those in power just arrest, assassinate, or buy off whoever is at the top of the hierarchy and effectively shut down the movement. Hierarchies can be resistant to this. Armies are effective precisely because they can keep functioning continuously even when officers are killed in combat. There is always someone ready and trained to step forward. More dangerous for resistance hierarchies is the risk that the leadership circle is compromised by infiltrators, as in the 1970s American Indian movement, or that the leaders are incompetent. Paradoxically, hierarchies can be more resistant to decapitation attacks than structureless movements. The leaders in more ad hoc groups get there without planning or training, so if they are lost, it can be much harder to replace them. In bold text, it says dynamic or situational hierarchies. In this system, people are given special authority by a democratic group under specific circumstances. This allows the group to make general decisions in a participatory way while still being able to respond quickly during actions or emergencies. This approach is used by many direct action-based groups. The Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, in which many decisions are made democratically, may choose one or two decision makers who can make quick judgment calls during direct action events. The Deacons for Defense use a similar approach. Lance Hill explains, monthly meetings were scheduled, but during the height of the Natchez campaign, they met daily if necessary. The chapter operated in a modified democratic style. As a quasi-paramilitary organization, the Deacons found it necessary to delegate authority to a leader for swift command, but they reserved the right to overrule the leader's decisions. Heck, even pirates used a similar system. Historical pirates in the Age of Sail were a kind of resistance movement. Many were former sailors or slaves who had been treated poorly or were simply kidnapped and forced into naval service. Faced with confinement, injury, and loss of life, many of them mutinied against their officers and the colonial powers they served. They became pirates, getting subsistence from remote islands while attacking the ships of those who mistreated and enslaved them. They often created a kind of pirate resistance culture that was in direct opposition to the colonial culture they had broken from. Many rejected the racism of their former masters and welcomed people of all ethnicities equally. They also used their own methods of decision making and command. Pirates would elect captains as well as quartermasters, who would be in complete command during battle, while quartermasters were responsible for coordinating day-to-day operations. If the crew was not happy with the captain or quartermaster, they could recall them and elect a replacement. Notable pirate captains were elected regardless of gender, unheard of in the time during conventional navies. Anarchist officers in the Spanish Civil War, see for example the Durruti column, were in charge during battle, but would eat and bunk with the rest of the soldiers, so they did not receive traditional special treatment associated with officer rank. Again, officers, as well as other soldiers, could be any gender. The same approach is used by the militants of the YPG, the People's Protection Units, and the YPJ, Women's Protection Units, in Syria and Kurdistan, is part of an ongoing fight against ISIL and for more egalitarian, ecological, and feminist society. In bold letters, majority rules. This is straightforward voting, a method that we are all familiar with. It has many strengths. Everyone knows it and doesn't require special training or complex procedure through a facilitator or chairs available, though a facilitator and chairs available. It is very scalable and works in groups of any size. Ideally, it is a compromise between being fast and being inclusive. It can be a way of building group unity. If everyone agrees with the process from the start, they will probably abide by the decision even if they personally disagree. But if an issue is very contentious, then rushing to a vote can actually exacerbate internal schisms and cause the group to splinter. Next.
It's often a wow, getting off to a good start. It's often a fallback method for consensus-based groups. By requiring a 2/3 or 3/4 majority, groups can require that they build at least some consensus before moving forward. All right. Next category, consensus-based. Once obscure consensus is now popular. In consensus-based decision making, a group discusses a problem until everyone, or almost everyone, agrees on a solution. There are many different models, some of which are highly structured and formalized, and other which are so informal as to be almost invisible. At its best, consensus is a powerful process that builds group solidarity and finds optimal solutions to problems. At its worst, it is a massive time sink that causes whole groups to become paralyzed over minor disagreements. For consensus to work properly, a few things must be in place. First, smaller groups can use consensus most effectively because everyone has a chance to share their thoughts and feelings in discussion. Second, everyone must have similar fundamental goals and politics. If not, people will be too preoccupied by basic philosophical disagreements to make decisions about action. Third, everyone must have a genuine investment in participation, because anyone who wants to deliberately sabotage decision making can do so easily. Fourth, because consensus-based decision making does use a specific structure and requires participation from everyone, all members of the group must have at least basic training in the model. And fifth, because of the extensive discussion involved, consensus requires generous amounts of time to work. Consensus has been used successfully through history by many different kinds of groups, from indigenous societies to religious groups like the Quakers, to social justice movements such as women's liberation, anti-nuclear, and anarchist groups. It can be used on a very large scale. Brazil's landless workers movement has chosen a highly participatory approach based around multiple layers of consensus-based groups. This approach prevents the group from being destroyed if a handful of organizers are killed or corrupted by bribery. It's a decision-making method optimized for decentralized and nonviolent groups with more than 1.5 million members. When consensus is used effectively and in the right situations, it's great, but it isn't perfect. Sometimes it gets applied to situations where it isn't appropriate, like a bunch of strangers at a protest with the possibility of imminent arrest by police, and it falls apart or causes needless delay and risk. The major time commitment and involvement in the process can be a barrier to participation because it requires so much biographical availability. That is, it can easily exclude people who, because of their life circumstances, don't have hours to sit around discussing decisions. And the consensus process doesn't always bring out the best results. Sometimes people hide their objections because they don't want to hold up the process or because they get tired. Sometimes legitimate experience and knowledge is undervalued because of a blanket assumption that everyone's contribution is always of equal value in every discussion. So now here's a section break. The takeaway: there's no single correct decision-making method. Specific situations call for specific kinds of decision-making. Paramilitary resistance groups used ranks and hierarchy out of necessity. Mass movements tend toward majority rules approaches that work effectively with large numbers. Smaller, lower-risk groups may prefer consensus, while those that use high-risk direct action often put someone in charge for the duration of an action. I'll finish this section and then I'll pass. Some decision-making and organizational approaches simply do not work together. For example, underground networks and pure consensus are not very compatible. Next.
Subsection 5. Open versus clandestine. Many groups struggle with how open they should be. Our options run the gamut from being totally open to all, to being able to expel or refuse members, to screen them, to accept members by invitation only, to being entirely clandestine or underground. Radical organizations that are entirely open often do not stay radical after they have seen some success. They risk being overwhelmed by new members who dilute the original politics. Many radicals have told me about how challenging they find it working in organizations that are largely open to new members and which limit their tactics to the lowest common denominator. This is a common pattern, though some groups like ACT UP have defied it for reasons I'll discuss in a few pages. On the other end, resistance organizations that mostly exclude potential members retain their politics but may stay small and isolated. Though being totally underground is dramatic and exciting in the movies, people who have worked underground in real life often experience a sense of detachment, anxiety, loneliness, or tedium. Anne Henson speaks in similar terms about a time period when she and Direct Action were living under false identification in Calgary, a place they had moved to get away from their pre-existing community. Quote, in places like El Salvador, I knew thousands of people were supporting the guerrillas. There was an interplay between the guerrillas and the people they represented. The liberation movement funded medical clinics and schools in remote mountain villages. In return, the people would hide fugitives and give them food and shelter when they needed it. Here, the five of us lived in total isolation from our community, accountable to no one, doing things on our own initiative. Emotionally, we were all just about ready to explode. End quote. Despite the challenges, most of the resistance movements in this book could not have succeeded without at least some clandestine or underground organizing. However, effective underground groups are separated from public and above-ground organizations by a firewall to keep both safe. The practicalities of this are discussed in Chapter 6. Why do people form underground groups? Armed guerrillas or saboteurs spring to mind immediately, but engaging in direct conflict with those in power is only one reason that groups engage in underground activities. Groups have gone underground or use underground actions for many reasons. First one of them, to provide asylum or escape to persecuted persons. The Underground Railroad in the antebellum United States is probably the most famous example of an underground network to help persecuted people escape or evade capture and punishment or death. Many brave people in Nazi-occupied Europe, of course, also hit Jews, escape prisoner of wars, and others are at risk of being sent to concentration camps. And in the modern day, various groups hide or shelter people or families at risk of deportation or violence. The sanctuary movement. Next.
In bold, to escape political, religious, or social persecution. Some groups are organized mainly to protect their members from repression and persecution. Early Christians held underground church meetings and used secret symbols to communicate and identify one another. Members of LGBTQ+ communities still remain part of the de facto underground in much of the world. And although not necessarily with the same degree of organization, some do use unique codes and signals. In bold, to gather intelligence. Some groups operate underground to gather intelligence or identify possible targets for future resistance or to pass on to other groups. This may involve long-term planning or deep cover in order to infiltrate oppressive institutions or governments. Any resistance movement needs good intelligence in order to be effective. Some similar clandestine techniques were used, albeit with less long-term planning, by people like Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. In bold, to share information, propagandize, or agitate. Some groups, especially early in the life of a resistance movement, work mostly to spread information through newspapers, radio, or other media. They may expose the misdeeds of those in power, share news about successful resistance, or encourage readers to resist or fight back. Underground newspapers existed in much of Nazi occupied Europe during the Second World War, and even more extensive samizdat distribution of banned literature took place later in Soviet bloc countries. In bold, to engage in nonviolent liberation organizing. Some political groups are forced to go underground because they are considered a threat to those in power and are declared illegal or face other reprisals. They go underground not just to avoid persecution, but to continue to work toward their broader political goals. One example would be the African National Congress, which was declared illegal in 1961 and went underground for decades before successfully ending apartheid in South Africa and being elected to a majority government. We'll return to the ANC in detail in Chapter 6, Security and Safety. In bold, to do direct action. Of course, underground groups have organized throughout history for many different forms of direct action, from the saboteurs of the South African MK to the modern Earth Liberation Front and Animal Liberation Front. My point, I hope, is clear. Underground organizations have a long, important, and honorable history in struggles for justice. Throughout this book, I'll refer to underground movements and I'll discuss the specifics of underground resistance. Of course, most people do not work underground who do not intend to. So why is this important? Everyone in a resistance movement should understand why movements benefit from diverse approaches and how movements can be strengthened by clandestine organizing. I want people to understand the role that underground groups have played in the past, so that they are not swept under the historical rug as unorthodox groups like the Deacons for Defense often are. The history of underground resistance is full of stories that are relevant, interesting, and inspiring. Next.
So that's actually a good place for us to stop the reading section. We're only 1 minute over the allotted time and move into the discussion section. So give me just a moment while I get everything kind of set up here. Boom. Okay. Yep, looks good. So this was a really, really good section we just read. There was a lot of really valuable stuff in there. You know, the stuff about like hierarchy versus consensus, like I have some criticisms, but not as much as the other section that was about centralization and decentralization. I think the section on consensus versus hierarchy, I like kind of disagree with his definitions, but I think there's a lot of good insight in that section. And the section about formal versus informal was like overflowing with valuable insight. There was a lot there. I think that also this discussion that he's having here towards the end about underground resistance and cell structures and compartmentalization, this stuff is, I hate to say it, it seems very appropriate for the moment we're in. So I'm interested to hear other people's opinions here. Was there a section that stood out to anybody in the group here?
Well, there were many. I'll just kind of towards the front. Just the one thing that stood out was the idea that centralized planning and decentralized execution it leads to better agility and good coordination. I thought that's pretty nice. I think one thing that is often misconstrued is that we seek to not plan beforehand. We just go do whatever. That's what direct action means. It means you just have fun and throw things and set things on fire without much plan beforehand. But largely, this doesn't lead to success. And if you don't have, I think this was actually brought up in the iron law of, what was it, involution or something?
Yeah, iron law of involution. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you don't actually have at least small tasks or plans ahead of time, you'll actually lose more people of the group and you will be less effective overall.
Yeah, I actually I think most of his critiques of consensus were good faith critiques. I think that's impressive given that I've heard so many bad faith critiques of consensus. He didn't overemphasize the slowness part. He sort of noted that if you have like people that are on the same train of logic, they got the same principles, then you can use consensus at huge scales, right? But the problem is that so much of the time consensus is used in situations where you have people with ideological diversity, and when you get ideological diversity, it can be kind of hard to come to agreements in the time scales that are needed. And so I, as you know, Logan, me and you have talked about it at length, but I'm interested in the situations when it is necessary to use, say, a full unanimous form of decision making, as opposed to a form where we just say it's good when we're at 2/3, or we can handle just people opting in at a simple majority. Like, when are those appropriate? That's kind of something that me and you have discussed personally.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, and I think this text did a pretty good job of that. But there was a lot of stuff mentioned here. So does anybody else have any things they wanted to point out?
Yeah, about that section, yeah, I felt like there could have been more criticism of the hierarchy structure, or like at least some guidance on what needs to happen for it to be well done, like he did for the consensus based part. It's like this kind of repeated quote unquote common sense definition of like hierarchies, like you need that to like make quick decision. But like one of the sentences, clear organization and purpose helps to maintain group unity and discipline. But you don't need hierarchy to have a clear organization and purpose. And the people that are able to take real part in decisions usually have much more group unity. And I would and I would think in many circumstances discipline. Like, I think it was one of your videos, I think, I don't remember exactly, but like criticizing the argument that hierarchy was efficient in like as a kind of common sense. Like oftentimes it's very not efficient because of all the structures of hierarchy it has to go through, but also yeah, because there's a lot of abuse of that structure, of that hierarchy. And also, like, there was an example earlier about the Vietnamese resistance fighters who, because of the hierarchy and the back and forth with the command, like, were pretty inefficient in what they were trying to achieve. So I think, yeah, and so one of the things that could have happened here is like, what needs to happen for hierarchy to be, a good choice, not just that it needs to be paramilitary, or like if you have to take quick decisions, but also like it can't be rigid or permanent, because then otherwise it can be abused. And if it's being too rigid, then you lose on the efficiency front, like in the Vietnamese example. So yeah, I thought that could have been kind of more fleshed out and a little bit less like they're all like perfectly valuable in their different contexts. I mean, I don't think, hierarchy has to be very clearly compartmentalized. Like how to say, controlled, like for the situation and the possibility of like removing the hierarchy for it to be successful. Otherwise, it's going to be abused or yeah.
I think he did actually a pretty good job critiquing the flaws in what he wouldn't call it hierarchical, a very centralized and hierarchical formal organization. That's what I think he would call it. But like, yeah, he did a pretty good job in his critiques there. He definitely noted the risk of the decapitation strike, which I've often pointed out, and I think is especially relevant given that Maduro just was straight up spirited away out of fucking Venezuela. But yeah, no, the decapitation strike is a very powerful mechanism. He talked about corruption of the leadership and how that was like a really like easy way to destroy hierarchical or hierarchical organizations. I think that, this is what I noted last time, so I'll kind of just repeat some of my insights here. He notice how he gives this difference here between a rank hierarchy and what he calls a dynamic or situational hierarchy. And I'll say what I said last time we read this text, and that is that a quote unquote dynamic or situational hierarchy is just what anarchists mean by delegation. Okay, this is just a description of the process of delegation. So he says, in the system, people are given special authority by a democratic group under specific circumstances. That's delegation, right? It allows the group to make general decisions in a participatory way and still be able to respond quickly during actions or emergency. So this is the strength of delegation. Now, we wouldn't call this a hierarchy. Delegation is the opposite of representation. But I think that maybe this gives us some insight into how he's using this word hierarchy. To him, hierarchy is when, any action is carried out, or rather, something is more hierarchical when fewer people are in the process of carrying out an action. The more people are in the process of carrying out an action, he calls that consensus if it's everybody. And if just very few people are carrying it out, it seems like he calls that hierarchy. We wouldn't call that a hierarchy. Like that could be a hierarchy, but he's just using this word in a different way. I feel like this section about hierarchies, it's more clear. Definitionally, I think I understand what he's saying better. The decentralized versus centralized section is baffling, to be deadly honest. But this section, I just disagree with his terminology. I understand what he's saying. I just disagree with what he's calling it. But yeah, no, social anarchists are using what he would call dynamic or situational hierarchies. Sorry to go on for too long, just repeating myself. Anybody else have any thoughts about the reading today?
Well, I have more like, I was confused by it's three requirements for like an organization if it's formal. There was the written document and the list of members, and then it said something about 3 layers. I don't think I understood that.
I'm scrolling back to see if I can find that section. I'd just like to note that I agree with everything he said in the formal versus informal section. I think that
Yes.
Those were just all like killer criticisms. He did a really good job. So I got it pulled up.
I just had no idea what the 3
Here you
layers.
go. Here they are.
Labor.
I'll just read them aloud for everybody who's listening.
Yeah.
1, it must have a written document outlining the organization's purpose and operation. This could be something as complicated as a binder full of charters and bylaws, or as simple as a page-long statement of a group's points of unity. 2, it must have a formal list of members. 3, it must have at least 3 layers of organization. This is the part that, I don't know. In a labor union, this could be made up of an executive committee, the shop stewards, and the rank and file. It doesn't even have to be hierarchical. It could be made up of a steering committee, active members, and supporters. So what you were wanting to comment on that?
No, I just didn't. I don't think I read 3 correctly. I get it now. That was kind of delved into even later in the text.
Yeah, I do think it's arbitrary, though. I gotta say, I don't.
I do.
Number 3 is a little bit arbitrary. I don't agree with him that like it has to have quote unquote 3 layers of organization. Now, don't get me wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Because even like a specifismo, for example, we've got it separated into 3 sections.
3 circles.
Cooperation Tulsa, we've got it separated into 4 sections, to be fair. We have four circles, right? But like, I don't know. Is that actually, I don't know if number 3 is a good standard for formalization.
Oh yeah, at least 3. You're right.
Yeah, at least 3. I guess maybe then that does make it apply to Cooperation Tulsa. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
maybe so. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to think about why 3 is the right number, but
And then another thing, they're talking about like statistics. They said that organizations that were highly centralized and formal were successful 70% of the time, and then formal and decentralized for like 54% of the times. Like, what were the statistics from?
here I got it brought
And
up.
like,
Gamson.
was it?
Did some person Gamson found okay, well, Gamson was mentioned earlier, so we'd have to find out. But
Right.
Gamson wrote about what he called combat readiness. So I don't know what the name of the section is. I don't want to press this link because it's going to take me to the end of the document. However, these statistics seem useful. Is that what you were wanting to comment on?
Can you right
Yeah,
click?
I'm more curious about like the methodology, like all the situations of those different groups definitely were not the same. I think it's very contextual. And I'd be interested to see if
Oh, I
that was
found it.
done.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize. You were correct, Zan. I didn't right click, but middle click 309. Oh, here it is. The Strategy of Social Protest. That's the book this is from. Sorry, go ahead, Logan. I apologize for interrupting you.
Oh no, I'm curious in like how they went about the studies, if they took into account like the different contexts, what the different organizations were actually fighting for, if they were just movement building, if they're doing specific tasks. That'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah, he gives statistics about whether they're issue based or whether they're movement based, and I think it was in a previous section, but he's done a
Okay.
pretty good job providing these. So these are really interesting. I did want to come back to these statistics. So groups with a mixed organizational approach had a success rate close to average. Informal centralized groups succeeded 56% of the time, while formal decentralized groups succeeded 50% of the time. Groups that were both informal and decentralized had abysmally low success rate of 15%. And I feel like I wanted to come back to this because I just wanted to like point out that this is the criticism that we generally have of anti-organizationalists or pure individualist anarchists, is that they want something that's informal and decentralized. And like the statistics show that is just incredibly ineffective, right?
Yes. Brutal.
15. Wow. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to dwell on that for too long, but anybody else have any thoughts that came about while we were reading through today's section?
It would be interesting to know what their successes are, like to have a bit more detail about their percentage. Like success as in like fulfill their goal. But what if your goal is like, complete revolution and construction of like a new society in the shell of the old, I guess that doesn't happen yet, but I don't think like I don't know, centralized group. Again, I'm like, what does that mean, right? So I'm not clear on what the success refers to, but also like, since we don't understand what he means by centralized versus decentralized, it's like, yeah, what does a group need to do, right?
Yeah, I find myself perplexed between what he means by centralization and what he means by rank hierarchies, right? Like, I, I still don't get it. It's like hierarchy. I think that we kind of assessed like it's about the number of people involved in decision making, but like you say, like carrying out or deciding on it. Because if it's deciding, yeah, that's so weird. Deciding, I guess. Like for me, when I think of what a delegate's job is, it's not deciding, it's carrying out. It's doing what people have already decided on. People already made the decisions. The delegate's just carrying them out. Whereas in an authoritarian structure, the decision is to let them make the decisions. You're essentially saying like, okay, now you get to make all of the decisions. Like that seems to be the basic factor taking place, the difference between representation and delegation. So yeah, it's weird because like centralization seems to be very similar to rank hierarchy in a sense. So I do find myself, as you say, kind of confused. One thing I do want to bring up, because I think this needs to be, I want us to discuss this today, and we're going to discuss it in future groups as well, because this book goes into further depth about it, but is all this stuff about the structuring of underground groups, right? I think that that seems like really important about how you structure an underground group and what the reasoning is as to why you might structure it that way. And compartmentalization, because I think that's one of the best points for this sort of underground cell structure method, is that it can compartmentalize information and therefore make it really hard for hierarchical structures to understand, to make you legible, number one, but also to infiltrate and destroy you, because all they can possibly do is go to an enormous amount of effort to infiltrate one cell, and that's all they get out of it. So like, I wonder what people's thoughts on that are. I don't go saying too much here, but if you want to give me your thoughts. Don't get us visited by the FBI, in other words.
Can you scroll up to the gray box?
This one right above it? Or where is it? Which one?
Um,
The cost of excessive centralization, or?
no, I think it's staff system. I think it was a.
Oh, the staff system. Yeah, I'll find that real quick.
It kind of seems like all of these different structures would have use depending on the situation. Like, obviously, there's going to be some situations where you need pure secrecy and, operating like independently. But then there's going to be other things where you're going to need that broad consensus-based support from, the mass base or whatever they want to call it. So I don't know. It's very interesting to me because it's like, yeah, depending on what the goal is or whatever, like all of these could have usefulness.
Yeah, I think I personally just like object like universally to rank hierarchy. I think that rank hierarchy, the good parts about it can be achieved through what he's calling, what was it, flexible or dynamic hierarchy, delegation, in other words. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that they definitely do the structures, as you were saying, the difference between a cell structure and consensus and so on. I think they all have their appropriate uses. My only objection is maybe universally to the concept of rank hierarchy. But wait, Zan, you wanted me to bring up the gray box. What was I got it here in front of us.
No, thanks. I was just trying to remember an example of how it was used, that structure. but it hasn't been helpful for commentary. I'm trying to find it on my own computer.
Yeah, I do think that, like, one thing I'll say is this. Okay, I've been trying to figure out how to say it without saying anything incriminating, but the cell structure seems like it is absolutely crucially necessary as tensions get more and more, right? As the conflict with hierarchical power gets worse and worse, cell structures will become necessary at a certain point. However, you don't want to just like figure it out on the spot, right? You don't want to just do it ad hoc after you're being suppressed. That's dangerous, and you're going to do it wrong, and you're going to rush it. So it kind of it makes a situation where you're like, oh, well, we want to create the cell structure beforehand. And it's like, well, then you got to be careful, because then what you have is a bunch of illegible, tiny groups making decisions nobody else is privy to. And when we're trying to build a horizontal revolutionary structure, like, that's kind of dangerous. You don't want to, it's like, it's a hard balance, is what I'm trying to get across. Like, you do wanna do it ahead of time. I think that maybe the idea is you create a protocol ahead of time, and then you activate the protocol when the time comes.
I was gonna say just something that made me laugh was the telling and selling. The telling, it was like, here's what we're gonna do. And then selling was like, here's the situation. Here's what we're gonna do. That just kind of, it made me, yeah, it just made me laugh.
Yeah, I remember reading through that section. I'm trying to find it, because there was, like, 5 of them. It wasn't just telling and selling, right?
Well, yeah, the last 3
Oh, there we go.
were
Here we go.
fine, but
Yeah,
the
yeah.
first 2, I was
Here we
like,
go.
wow.
These are the 5 right here. So just for people who are listening, telling, here's the situation, and this is what we're going to do. Go do it. That's hierarchical power. Selling, here's the situation. This is what we are going to do, and why I decided on this. Go do it. Yeah, that's hierarchical power. Third one, testing. Here's the situation. Here's my solution. What do you think? That's consensus, Consulting. Here's the situation. What do you think we should do? Listening to ideas, then taking the best of the lot. Again, that's consensus. Although I guess you can do it from outside of a consensus structure. You can consult. But number 5 is co-creating. Here's the situation. Let's come up with a solution together. That's the best description of consensus I can imagine. But telling and selling, that's hierarchical power. Long Defiant makes a good comment. Authority remains in the group. No one person has authority. They have responsibilities. Exactly. That's the difference between a hierarchical, representative structure and a horizontal delegate structure. Delegates have responsibilities, not authority. But that's, terminological to some degree. We got like about 5 minutes left. Anybody have any closing thoughts?
Well, one thing I don't remember reading the first time was that the KKK attacked Wobblies in Tulsa, burning them with tar.
That's real,
I
bro.
do not remember that.
That's real. Yeah. No, I read about that a while back. The IWW used to be very strong here in Oklahoma. In the early 1900s, the IWW, like, there were like 3 major socialist organizations that had their headquarters in Oklahoma. This is where their like main field offices were. It was like IWW, and like one was like some Trotskyist org, and another one was like Socialist Party, or the Socialist Party America or some shit like that. But they had like major offices here. There was a time when agrarian socialism was the default in Oklahoma. You'd go out and talk to fucking rural people, and they'd be fucking agrarian socialists, and it was super effective. Like, I don't know why we don't have the idea that we want to do that these days, but Back then, socialists were like, oh, you're in a rural area? No, you're not. You're definitely not unable to be salvaged. We think that you should be right on board with our shit. And they'd go out there and proselytize to rural people. It's the way that's what used to be the fucking default. And they stopped and we lost Oklahoma.
Brutal.
Yeah, this whole thing. Oh no, go ahead.
Well, it's just something about that section as well that was worth remembering, about the criticism of the Wobblies for kind of always starting again with organizing strikes and kind of putting energy in that rather than trying to, although it's hard, but like trying to keep those locale like ready to go and like continued on this long-term goals of socialism or like liberation, etc., rather than just focusing on like strikes for like punctual goals. So I thought that was an important lesson.
Absolutely 1,000% agreed. Yeah, because like part of the reason why that I am such a like formal organizationalist anarchist is that I've seen this whole like process where we like, oh, we create the body on the spot and we do the thing and then it disappears. And then next protest cycle, everybody has to put in all the legwork to get all the same damn processes in place. It's so frustrating where I'm like, damn, this is like 3 months, 4 months, 5 months of startup process that y'all have to repeat every single time because you're so adverse to formal organization. And like that shit just does not work, you know, like I wish that we could stop. Logan, I see you're unmuted. I don't know if you're wanting to say something. bro said it's as funny as starting a new Minecraft world, you know. I don't know. Is that right?
Starting fresh. It's all fun and games.
So
No worries.
true. So true. I love when liberation has to start from square one all over again. But anyway, yeah, no, this actually been this was a rich reading this evening. We had a really good conversation surrounding it. We're coming to a close here. It is now 9 p.m. I appreciate everybody showing up for the reading group. I appreciate everybody showing up for the live stream. And once again, I just want to remind people, if you want to support Cooperation Tulsa, we have an open collective. That's opencollective.com/Cooperation Tulsa. I'm going to send y'all the link in the chat. We are definitely in fundraising mode. We're trying to fundraise for the next year. I just want to encourage people to go donate whatever you can afford to the Open Collective for Cooperation Tulsa. We make the vast majority of our money. The vast majority of money that is spent comes from all kinds of people just giving us like $2, $5, $10, $20 a month. It's up to you, whatever you want to donate. That stuff that adds up. I just want to emphasize to everybody how much that it just adds up, all those small donations. Also, if you become a donor on the Open Collective, all you have to do is reach out to us and tell us, and we will invite you to the Cooperation Tulsa Discord, and therefore you will be able to get access to all of these discussion groups. If you want to join these discussion groups, all you have to do is become a donor for any amount to the Cooperation Tulsa Open Collective. That's the spiel. Thank you, everybody, for sitting in. I'll see you next time.
Have a good night, everyone.
Take
See ya.
care.